So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today with our guest speaker, Richard Dennis. I'm really delighted to have Richard join us. We're a huge fan of his work and the work of the Australia Institute, and Richard's been a great supporter of all of the adventures that Nina has been going on and about. But before I introduce Richard properly, I just want to give a quick plug to the work that Nina and Ayla are doing. And before I do all of that, I'd like to acknowledge country. So I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples here in beautiful North Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present and emerging leaders and elders. I'd like to acknowledge the remarkable civilizational culture that has cared for country and cared for kin since time immemorial. And as I always do, acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonization on this continent. And the work that we do inside Ayla and Nina and Future Dreaming is about finding the future for all of us on this beautiful continent, one that recognises that sovereignty was never ceded and that we're all in this great big mess together and that we've got a much better future if we work together and learn from the Indigenous custodians of this land. I might just share screen for just a moment and give a nice cheerful plug for all of the good things that we're doing inside, no, not that one, this one, Earth Laws Month. So this event today, and we've got several other webinars this week that I can hope that you will join, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and the New Economy Network Australia, so Ayla and Nina, are considered sister organisations. They connect and cross-promote their work. Earth Laws Month is more than 35 events this month, most of which are free across days, mornings, afternoons and evenings. And we've got a range of amazing speakers across topics like law, economics, arts and creativity, sciences and beyond. And today we're actually in week 2. You can see we've got lots of fantastic events. What would it take to build an Earth-centred economy is what Richard and I are going to talk about today and listen to your questions later and discussions. Tomorrow we have degrowth in Australia. On Thursday, we're looking at, can a well-being economy protect the environment? And we'll be hearing from some of the people who are leading the fray in trying to develop what well-being economics really looks like. On Thursday night, I'd love you to join us, Future Dreaming, with Indigenous elders Mary Graham and Ross Williams, and I'll be joining them. And rather than great expectations, I just have to show this. Not great expectations, medium expectations. How can we reduce our demands on the living world? So do think about joining us then. So Ayla was formed 10 years ago now to help create an understanding and the practical implementation of what Earth-centred everything and Earth-centred governance might look like. If you don't know about our work and are interested, please visit our website, become a member, join up to the mailing list, connect in whatever way you can. Ayla played a role in supporting the auspicing of the New Economy Network Australia, which is a really fantastic network, thousands of Aussies, individuals and organisations coming together to discuss, explore and advocate for what a healthy economy looks like. And economics for the earth, the activities we're doing this week, are all part of Earth Laws Month. And upcoming, we've got the Nina Housing Week adventures. We've got the Co-ops Week as well. And something that Richard Dennis doesn't know about yet, but we're going to be chasing him and others from the Australia Institute and beyond to come and give us some talks in October, November about what it might look like if ordinary citizens created the federal budget. This is going to be a project that Nina will be experimenting with. But all those comments are just by way of introduction to the broader picture of what the New Economy Network Australia and Ayla are up to. What I'd like to do now is introduce Richard Dennis, although I'm sure most of you know that he's, I think one of the descriptions of him, I think it might have been in his Wikipedia note, was he's one of the most either notorious or feared public intellectuals in Australia, or in the top 10 dangerous thinkers. I'm not sure where you got that accolade from, Richard, but it seems like a nice one to me. So welcome, Richard. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here talking with you, Michelle, and the network that you've created. It's, yeah, wonderful. So no, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Richard. And our topic today is, what would it take to create an Earth-centred economy? This might seem like a fanciful notion, but given the plight that we find ourselves in, both with climate change, biodiversity loss, and many of the other ecological problems that we're facing in this continent due to over-extraction and some of our expansionist modes of being, I think it's a really nice topic to get someone like Richard to think about and share his thoughts with us. So our format will be, I've invited Richard to have a bit of a yarn for about 20 minutes, and then he and I are going to have a bit of a chat together. I've got a couple of questions for him, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. If you have questions at any time throughout the discussion, please just write them in the chat. And my wonderful colleague, James Lee, also from AILA, and who supports many of our NINA initiatives, will be collecting your questions, popping them in a document, and I'll run through them in the final 20 minutes or so, or half an hour. So I'm going to take the spotlight off me, and Richard, I'd love to hear from you. What would it take to create an Earth-centred economy in Australia?
Well, thank you. And what a great question. I'm going to start with a really simple answer, and then I'll expand on it. What would it take to create an Earth-centric economy? It would take us wanting to have one. And when I mean us, I don't just mean us on the call today. I mean enough of us in a democracy to get the economy we want. Now, you know, this conversation can go in lots of different ways, and I'll happily take questions from anywhere. But let's just start with my strength with economics. There is literally nothing in any economics textbook anywhere that says we can't have an Earth-centric economy. I don't doubt for a minute that implicit and even explicit in some of those textbooks is a preference for a different kind of economy, maybe a preference for one that makes a lot of particular kinds of stuff. But if you take economics seriously, as I do, you take its philosophical foundations seriously, as I do, and you take empirical evidence seriously, as I do, it's quite obvious that what economics is here to do is to help humans organize their affairs in such a way that they get more of the things they want more of and less of the things they want less of. And we'll leave money out of it for the time being. Let's even leave markets out of it for the time being. I'll bring them back in. But the purpose of economics, literally self-described and pretty much in practice, is to help people answer the questions: what to produce, when to produce, for whom to produce, right? These are all distributional questions about what do we want. Now, we usually abandon that part of the conversation about what do we want out of our economy. And in Australia in the 21st century and for the latter part of the 20th century, we, instead of having a simple conversation about economics, about opportunity cost, about trade-off that says, well, what would you like? Because, you know, we can help you get what you want. You just got to tell us what you want. And there's no free lunches. You know, we can't have everything. Rather than have that simple, I would say, nice and helpful conversation about economics, we've replaced that. We've supplanted that with a radically different conversation about what does the economy need? Not what do you want? Not what does your community want? Not what do we all want? What does the economy need? Now, I'm choosing my words carefully here. I'm speaking literally. I don't know what that means, because economies don't need anything. Economies don't want anything. And stick with me here, economies are a figment of our imagination. When we talk about the economy, we're talking about an abstract construction. We're really trying to say there's 25 million people in Australia, and some of them want to have pizza for dinner, and some of them want to tackle climate change, and others really want to impress their neighbours with a big new car. It is literally meaningless to ask me as an economist what's good for the economy, or what's good, what does the economy need? Now, why do we do this? It's no accident. Like, why have we moved away from saying economics is a way to help people think about what they want, how best to produce that, who to distribute it to? It's no accident that we've got rid of that and created a radically different, I would suggest, nonsensical conversation about what does the economy need. And that's because people with the most power, with the loudest voice, often, but not always with the most money behind them, have realized that the best way to win a conversation about what they want, like I'd like a tax cut for me because if I had more money, I could spend more money on the things I like. People with wealth and power figured out ages ago that rather than having a conversation about them, I'd like to be able to dump my pollution into your river or your atmosphere. I'd like to keep my production costs down, because if I keep my production costs down, I can make more profit and then I can build a bigger house. So rather than people say, I'd like to have a tax cut for me, can I have one? Or I'd like the right to pollute you, is that all right? We have a conversation instead, not about what the person with wealth and power wants. We have a conversation about what the economy needs. So, you know, in order to make the economy strong so that your children have a better chance of getting a well-paid job, we need to create incentives in the labor market. And the best way to create incentives in the labor market so that your kid can get a job is to cut taxes for high income earners. See what I did there? I didn't say, I'd like a tax cut. Can I have a tax cut? I've said, what I want to do is help the whole economy. And the best way to help the economy is, as luck would have it, to help me and give me that tax cut I wanted. So by flipping our conversation about economics away from, you know, what could we do? What should we do? What do you want to do? Let's have a debate about it. By flipping that into a conversation about what does the economy need, or what is good for the economy, then we've been able to completely abolish most of the sort of foundational principles of economics and replace them with this kind of doctrine that there is no choice. Now, economics is all about choice. What do you want? You know, what are the trade-offs? What are the opportunity costs? But we've actually said there is no choice. We have to cut taxes. That's good for the economy. We have to cut wages. That's good for the economy. We have to cut regulations. That's good for the economy. We have to let people build new coal mines and new gas wells in places of beautiful environmental or heritage value, right? So rather than talk about, hey, everybody, do you think as we try to tackle climate change, we need to build new coal mines or not? No, don't have that conversation. Start with, do you want the economy to be strong? And do you want your children to have a job? Because if you want a strong economy and your kids to have a job, it seems like we'll have to have this new coal mine that you don't want, or this new gas well that you don't want, or this dam that you don't want, or you name it. So unfortunately, a key part of modern economics debate has been to shift the debate away from a genuine democratic conversation about what do we want more of, towards this kind of technocratic conversation about what does the economy need. And anyone that wants a strong economy would obviously have to place their faith in economists to report back to the group on what the economy needs. Now, my self-appointed role in life is to blow the whistle on this stuff and say, look, I studied economics, I taught economics, I research economics, and no one taught me anything about what you want. No one taught me anything about what's good for you, what kind of community you want to have. And again, first principles, what's economics supposed to be about? It's supposed to be about a toolbox to help people get what they want. So I'll give you a trivial example and then I'll extend it to a big example. As a rule, economists, myself included, are generally libertarian. We think that most of us think that you're best placed to make most of the decisions about your life, brackets, except if they impose costs on other people. So if you want to have pizza for lunch, if you want to have a hamburger for lunch, if you want to have sushi for lunch, most economists will say, whatever, I'm on your side. You go choose, you go do that. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of economists, myself included, think that markets are pretty good at allocating lots of resources, including the lunch resources, right? You don't hear a lot of people saying the government should set up the Department of Lunch and we should have publicly provided lunch because people can't be trusted to choose their own lunch. Like, we could do that, but we generally don't. But and that's one of the reasons that economists are generally libertarian. It's like, well, you've got some money in your pocket. You know what you like. You know how hungry you are. You know what you feel like. I'm happy to leave it to you to decide what you want to do. But being free market, if that's a meaningful concept in that context, I'm happy for you to make your own lunch or buy your own lunch, is unrelated to whether I think you should be free to put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere or dump a pollutant into a river or steal wages from your staff or build an enormous building that blocks your neighbour's view and crowds out their solar panels. Once individuals are starting to make decisions that affect other people or in fact affect other species or affect whole ecosystems, then there's nothing in any economics textbook that says, let it rip. Okay, the fact that we're happy for you to choose what color pants to wear and what you want to wear, have for lunch, or how much to pay for a haircut or not, the fact that economics suggests that you're best off to make most of those decisions for yourself is unrelated to the kind of decisions that are actually important to a country like Australia at a point like this in world history. So I think we need to think really hard. So now to come to the kind of more important stuff, how do we build an Earth-centric economy? Well, we just have to be really strong and really loud and really clear about the differences, about when we're happy for individuals to go their own way and when we as a group, whether it's majority or a complete consensus, is kind of irrelevant. That's a democratic issue. But just because we're happy for individuals to go their own way on some issues doesn't mean that we can't step in and do exactly what we want to do collectively. So I'll give you some examples. On our behalf, everyone here in the call, the previous government and the current government on our behalf have decided that spending $250 billion, $250,000 million to buy us some submarines is a good idea. Now, personally, I'm not convinced, but let's stick with the positives here. Australia is so rich that we can afford to spend $250 billion, not on national defense, just on one project, just on some submarines. And, really, it's not even a big deal because our national income is $2 trillion a year, 250 billion spread out over a couple of decades, which really isn't a lot of money. But we live in a society where we're told that we can't afford to tackle climate change, or we can't afford to pay aged care workers more, or we can't afford to restore our ecosystems, or we can't afford to say no to some economic developments in the remaining koala habitats. So this again is the power of economics is to dress up the interests of a few as being in the national interest, while telling everybody else that we, quote, can't afford to do things that powerful people just don't want to do. So again, sticking with the good news with the submarines, if we can drop 250 billion into that, you'd think we could kind of, install a few more renewable energies pretty quick, or get some public transport rolled out pretty quick, or fix public housing pretty quick. And you know what? We could. We're choosing not to. Right? That's the brutal bit that people don't want to engage with. We could do that, but people we've elected, not you, not me, everyone else, the people we've elected would prefer to drop 250 billion onto nuclear subs than to spend 250 billion fixing our energy system for decades to come. So we're rich, that's good news. How we spend our money, well, that's a collective action problem that we're not very good at. B, you often hear people say, the problem with climate change is it's a wicked problem. See, we've called the problem wicked, not the people causing it. It's a wicked problem because the costs of tackling climate change are up front, but the benefits of outlaying the money required to tackle climate change The benefits don't show up until the future, and they're a bit uncertain. So we're told that tackling climate change is this real democratic challenge. Garneau said it, Stern said it, we hear it all the time, but I'm an optimist. Let's look at the subs again. Are the costs up front? Yep. Are the benefits in the future? Decades away. Are the benefits certain? No, might not ever use the subs. Subs might get sunk the first time we send them out with some new uninvented drone technology. So when it comes to submarines, there's plenty of money. When it comes to submarine, there's plenty of long-term planning. A lot of people on the progressive side of politics like to tell themselves that the problem is governments can't think long-term. I guarantee you that the nuclear submarine program is very, very long-term. So I'll wrap up in a minute. I'm just trying to be a bit provocative here, and I'm sure there's plenty of questions, but actually building an Earth-centric economy is easy, right? Because there's no economic problem with doing it. The Egyptians were so rich, they were thanks to the flooding of the Nile, thanks to the fertility of the soil, the Egyptians could generate a year's worth of food with about 3 months worth of work. So they had 9 months a year to do anything they want, like build pyramids. Right? Their economy, like they were rich. So they had to think up some crazy stuff to do. Right? They'd met their food needs, they'd met their clothing needs, they'd met their shelter needs, and someone went, hang on, I got a plan. What if we moved millions of tons of rocks from over here and made them in a particular shape? And everyone went, cracking idea. What else would we do with all our leisure time? Well, we don't build mountains of rocks. We build mountains of garbage. All right. We go to the shops. We buy stuff because we're bored. Not you, other people. And we come home and we're too busy to, assemble the furniture we bought or wear the clothes we bought. So we store it for a while in our oversized home and then we chuck it out eventually. And you know what? That's good for the economy. But that's not economics, because if you wasted your money buying art, buying piano lessons, buying maths tutoring for your kid, buying saplings and walking out and planting them, the economy doesn't care what you waste your money on. The economy doesn't care if we build pyramids of granite, of sandstone and marble, or pyramids of rubbish. The economy doesn't exist. The economy doesn't care. The people who sell crap we don't need, they care. Right? There's no doubt that, the people that own shopping centres are very keen for us to behave in a way that humans have never behaved in the last 7,000 years of recorded history. Going out, buying things, not using them, chucking them out. Because if you're in the selling stuff business or the transporting stuff business or the owning waste dump business, happy days. But if we as a society decided to have radically different patterns of work, radically different patterns of spending, the economy won't care at all. Some people who currently make profits out of parts of the economy were really threatened when people stopped commuting into the CBD and buying expensive lunches in the CBD. But now people are walking to their local shops and getting a coffee there. We've just changed the shape of the economy, right? It's not terrible for the economy that cafes in the city went broke. It's terrible for the people who own cafes in the city. And it's great for someone else, right? So, yeah, we have to be very careful with this idea of the economy because it's literally just the sum of our collective actions. So if we collectively want to have an Earth-centric economy, we can have one, but it's a democracy. We have to convince the other people to get out of the way.
Thanks, Richard. Excellent as always. Some folks are saying just a wonderful exposition of the issues, making it very clear. So let me be a little provocative now, Richard. It seems to me that we've got maybe 3 big chunks of stuff we can talk about before we open up to questions. The first one is not about economics. It's about the collective decision-making and the collective structural stuff that you've just mentioned. And that really comes down to some of our political structures. So we might come back to that in a tick. I've got some questions for you about how exactly we do become strong, loud and clear when the representative democratic system we have often doesn't allow us. And that connects to the second issue, which is the loud, strong voices of the vested interests, the people who like to think that they're in control of the economy and the market. You know, what do we do about that? Not you, of course, not me, them. I like your framing, not you, them. And then the third thing to me is the nuts and bolts of, okay, let's pretend everyone does want a slightly different, you know, economic system that's focused on the living world and the health of all of us. I wonder if we can explore just a little bit about the nuts and bolts and the tools of that, because inside the NINA network, we're trying desperately to build two things: that collective voice, more people coming together and sharing ideas, but also some good ideas that other people can get behind. Not so much advocating to government, but trying to build the new economy in the shell of the old, etc. But let's start with the political stuff. Richard, you always talk really well about the fact that the market reacted angrily today. It's really just a bunch of rich people going, damn it, I've just lost some of my investments. In our political system in Australia, as it is right now, do you see better ways for us as ordinary folks who aren't politicians, if anyone is, welcome, to get our strong, loud voices into a system that is very much controlled by two-party politics, very much controlled by the kind of rich lobby groups that are pushing for certain kinds of economic activity? How do people get these strong, loud voices, or how do we change the political system that governs the economy?
Yeah, look, I guess I'd take those questions as interrelated, because our electoral system is different from the one that we used to have. It's different from the one in every other country in the world. Our democratic structures are within our control, just as who we vote for is within our control. And you know, we have to, for people that want to change the world, I'm sorry, part of changing the world is changing electoral systems from time to time. Let's have a look at our electoral system, what it did at the last election. It generated incredible diversity in our House of Representatives, and it delivered a radical change in the balance of power in our Senate, because a whole bunch of individuals who were a bit tired of you know, their electorate being taken for granted by a particular party, actually got in and built new organizations and ran and won. And isn't that a lot more fun than complaining? So, you know, democracy is a team sport. Democracy is a participation sport. And one of the kind of most dangerous stories that we're told, or we tell ourselves, is that our vote doesn't matter. Because if we say that, and if our kids hear that, and our friends hear that, if we actually believe that it doesn't matter who you vote for, we've actually just abandoned democracy, because democracy is built on the foundation that it does matter who you vote for. So rather than people saying, oh, they're all the same, I don't care, a whole bunch of people pulled together at the last election and have tried in previous elections, but they're standing on the shoulders of giants, and quite radically transformed Australian politics in ways that I think will last for at least a decade, if not permanently. So, yeah, democracy is a participation sport. And don't get me wrong, I understand the instinct to think, well, the world's a bit big, I'm going to build a permaculture garden in my backyard and that's all going to be fine. Okay, you can do that. But if your neighbours have radically different approaches, then you'll end up losing that backyard to someone that wants to turn it into a high rise. Democracy is where we jointly make a lot of decisions. And I do think that we have to dedicate some, but not most of us, all of our lives to participation in that. Voting is a bare minimum, but I think we need to take democracy seriously. And to be clear, you can't have democracy without a politician. So whenever you hear someone saying all politicians are the same, that decodes as democracy doesn't work. Well, I don't know what your next best idea is, but I look around the world and I don't see anything better than democracy, flawed though it is. And what we saw at the last election was when people really get motivated, they can change things. And that's something I think we need to keep encouraging.
No, thanks, Richard. I think it's a very optimistic message. And certainly what we saw the Teals and the Greens and other independents do was extremely encouraging. And although it's a topic for another conversation, recently in NINA, we were talking about governance structures and how our representative democracy with voting, and then the rep works for 4 years or 3 years, then disappears again. And other countries have more liquid democracy, ways for people to have a greater say. I think these are all the things that we can explore inside the NINA network about how do we infuse our systems with more input from people and more choices, more sharing their views, whether it's through referenda, or in this country, that's a dirty word almost, but whether it's through ongoing surveys and information. So might leave that political conversation there and now turn to the kinds of ways that I'm not asking you to answer all things, but what are some of the trends you've seen in people successfully challenging the sort of vested interests or the 1%, the elite, the corporatocracy? What are your thoughts on those aspects of power in Australian society?
Oh, look, Australia, for a democracy, Australia has incredible concentration of power. So unfortunately, for a lot of people on the call today, if you wanted vibrant democracy, you might have been born in or moved to the wrong country, because it's hard work here in Australia. And when you watch how the coal industry and the gas industry can get projects built despite overwhelming community opposition, you know that there's something wrong with your democracy. But do I see improvements? Do I see people winning things? Yeah, look, I do. The Australia Institute just had, we brought Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winning economist, out here for a couple of weeks in July. And he went around the country saying he can't believe we didn't have a windfall tax on the gas industry. And it's really great. I can't barely open a newspaper now where I don't hear, a whole bunch of what were historically quite conservative economists saying, we need to tax the resources industry more in Australia. Now, we've tried and failed before, but there's two lessons you can take from that. Don't try again or try harder. Well, I'm in the try harder camp. And yeah, we can and we will win some of these battles. But and look, there's no doubt that renewable energy, for example, millions of housetops with solar panels on their roof, that's really cutting the lunch of some of our coal-fired generators. Is that enough? No. Do we need government policy and regulation? You bet. Should we spend $10 billion a year subsidizing the fossil fuel industry? I wouldn't think so. But, do I see that there's change? Yes. But is it fast enough? No. So that just means we have to try harder from my point of view.
And with the corporate or the centralised control and power, the media is obviously a big issue in Australia. Some folks used to say that when you're a coal colony like Australia, you become, prey to the Murdoch press for so many reasons. How can networks like NINA or ordinary Aussies make sure that the correct information, the kinds of reports and research you guys do, the kinds of information we dig up through our webinar discussions, how can we get more of that out into the world, do you think?
Yeah, look, like our banking system, like our supermarkets, like our airlines, our media is incredibly concentrated in Australia. And don't get me wrong, Facebook in particular can be a very dangerous tool when deployed deliberately, as it sometimes has been. But let's not sort of fantasize about the past. 25 years ago, when I kind of started in this game, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was no web page. And if I couldn't talk Channel 9 or the Sydney Morning Herald into publicising my research, then no one had any chance of finding it unless I stood on a corner waving a mimeograph around. So, no, like literally, that's true. Whereas now, the Australia Institute has an enormous list of people who follow us on and get regular emails and follow us on Twitter. And we have Australia Institute TV. We broadcast our own content. NINA presumably does similar things. So, yeah, don't get me wrong. Powerful people want you to feel like you have no power. Part of their best trick is to convince you that unless we can tear Rupert Murdoch from the chairman's office of News Corp, we're stuffed. This is not true. The Courier Mail raged against the Labor government or Labor Party in Queensland for 3 elections in a row, and Labor's won them all. The Herald Sun raged against Daniel Andrews. He didn't stop him winning elections. He'll win the next one in a doddle. The Australian and the Murdoch press raged against Labor at the last federal election, and look who won. So I'm not saying that Murdoch doesn't have power. Of course he does. But we're helping him if we tell ourselves that his power is so all-consuming. You know, the reality is the majority of Australians ignore the views of the Murdoch press when they've voted in Queensland, Victoria, and Australian elections. So yeah, the media are not our friends, but boy, can we connect with each other in powerful ways these days.
I think that's excellent. That's really optimistic. And definitely social media has broken down some of the old knowledge systems being centrally controlled. As you say, the dark side of that, but there's always a dark side to everything, of course. So let's turn now, and then we'll open up for a bigger discussion. I was just wondering if you could put your true economist's hat on, and if we woke up tomorrow and we were all in favour of really shifting the structures, the institutions, the tools that we have currently working in our economy, using what's available, how could we change things to be more friendly to our Earth?
Oh, well, we literally can do anything we want. I mean, that's what we have to, we have to grow up. We have to see that we're the adults. There's no one that knows more than us.
Yep.
And we actually, no, that's it, right? This is as good as it gets. And it's not perfect. And, not you and me, but boy, there's some idiots out there somewhere. But no one's coming to help, okay? This is it. This is us. And if the small organised group has convinced us that we can't change certain things, then that's them winning and us losing. So what could we do? Well, let's start small. What if we scrapped $250 billion worth of submarine purchase and said to Australia, what are the pressing problems you'd like fixed? Would you like better healthcare? Would you like better education? Would you like better aged care? Because now that we're not going to waste $250 billion on that, we could afford to do this. We'd have the resources to do this. Perhaps if we didn't spend $10 billion a year subsidising fossil fuels, what else might we subsidise? Subsidies are good. The purpose of a subsidy is to help us get more of something we want more of. Subsidies are only bad when we're subsidising things we want less of. Right? So what would you like more of is really simple. So there's the spending allocations, which we could radically change in no time. And the people who make money selling submarines and the people making money selling diesel, they will go broke. So we have to own that and say, well, sorry, what happened was, just like when we stopped going to the video store and started watching things on Netflix, the video stores went broke. Sorry about that. Hopefully we can be generous with unemployment benefits. Hopefully we can offer people retraining. But when we change our consumption patterns, when we stop renting videos, when I stop getting my hair cut, this has consequences for people who work in other industries. So if we want to change the shape of our economy, we can do that very quickly. There will be unemployment, that's true. There will be consequences, that's true. But there were consequences when we moved away from DVDs. Remember photo development labs? Remember when we used to spend $25 to wait a week to get back blurry photos of people we don't recognize? No, but that used to be a significant part of GDP, and then it's gone. Was there someone that owned a photo development lab that lost their business? Yeah. Did that stop us changing? No. So change is inevitable. We're going to change. We're just haggling about the direction and the pace. But then I think we can think a lot bigger than what do we spend money on. It's entirely arbitrary that we work 5 days a week and call that full time. A lot of people on here don't work 5 days a week. That's fine. Maybe some work 6, maybe some work 3. Who cares? The purpose of working is to get money to buy things you need. If we as a society don't need so much stuff, don't need to buy so much stuff from other people, then we don't need to work so much. But when we collectively make crazy decisions about housing, for example, such that housing is so expensive that the only way to possibly have a house is for 2 people to work full time for 20 years, then that collective failure in the housing space is actually driving enormous consequences through the rest of our lives. So yeah, it's a big question. I can't answer it in full here, but changing what we spend money on, that's how you change the shape of the economy. And the quicker we do it, the better. The more money we spend on services, the less money we spend on stuff, the better, full stop. Which services, up to you, but stop buying crap that winds up in the pyramid of waste. And as for our lives, how much do we work? What kind of work do? We do have agency there, but because of things like access to housing and access to public transport, collective decisions have a big impact on the ability of individuals to have autonomy.
Thanks, Richard. I've jotted down, to summarise all of that, the ideas around rethinking what an economy is for, rethinking who makes it, and we talk about that in the NINA network, and I'm just bringing it back to the work we do. And I like the idea of rethinking work. It's been a huge part, obviously, of things like the voluntary simplicity movement, degrowth, many other good things. And in NINA, there's a UBI, Universal Basic Income Working Group. There's people looking at, well, what would happen to Australian society if more people were free to pursue the things they loved to do rather than being tied to these issues. And in NINA Housing Week, these weird, intricate problems around housing and this ridiculous crisis in a country that can do much better will be explored. Can we just talk one more minute about the subsidies? If folks are to look at the Australian federal budget, how do we read the budget to see those hidden subsidies? Because a lot of people often say, you don't see that line item, you don't see those issues. I imagine these are subsidies that are for roads and for free water instead of paying for water. What else can people kind of be aware of in terms of what the federal government subsidises for fossil fuels and other extractive industries?
Yeah, look, the easy thing would be for people to Google the Australia Institute and the word fossil fuel subsidies. You'll find a ready reckoner we've already written. And look, you're right, the budget papers, don't really, they're at great pains to say, look how much we're spending on the health system. But you have to look a little harder, and I'm not making this up, to find out that Australia spends more on subsidies for the diesel fuel credits than it spends on the entire Australian army. But those numbers are there in the budget paper. It's just they don't have asterisks. This is a big fossil fuel subsidy. So we've done that work. If you Google it, you'll find it. But yeah, look, this is the point, that we're one of the richest countries in the world. We can afford to do anything we want, but we can't afford to do everything we want. So if we keep pouring enormous resources into helping the oil and gas industry explore for more oil and gas, right? Explore for more stuff we haven't even found yet. Your taxpayers' money is currently being used to go looking for oil and gas that hasn't even been found. Then after we find it, we'll be happy to subsidise someone to extract it. And then when they sell it, we'll be happy to subsidise some of the sale. So yeah, as a society, if we want to make decisions that dumb, no one will stop us. But they're democratic decisions. That's not economics. And all countries do something stupid. Like, think about America. Go to America and say, hey, I just thought I'd show you some data showing these assault rifles might actually be a bit dangerous. They're like, hey, we got a democracy and we love assault rifles, so thanks for your data, piss off. Well, when other people come to Australia and say, what's with this subsidising fossil fuels? Like, shouldn't you be taxing the bejesus out of them and trying to transition away from them? Thanks for your data, piss off. Right? So, or the Japanese with whaling or whatever. Like, it's a democracy. No one's going to stop us doing crazy stuff except us. And if we, and it's nice to do the good things, but if we don't work together to stop the bad things happen.
Thanks, Richard. And now we're going to go, we've got some really excellent questions in our list. So I'm just going to work my way through from the beginning until the end, folks. So keep putting your questions in. I hope to get to all of them. I will group them where I can, but bear with us. So to start with, Sian has asked, Richard, would you accept the evidence of Eleanor Ostrom, who explained in her 2009 Nobel Prize that wicked problems like climate created by market failure can be solved without markets or a state? the solution depends on how local communities can self-govern themselves locally. What do you think of that?
I think the short answer is a firm maybe. It depends on the scale of the problem and the scale of the actors participating in it. I mean, imagine, for example, you've got multinational mining companies showing up in a small community in a developing country. I think it's a bit rude of us to say, oh, gee, if only that community could band together and be a bit stronger, they could have won that one. So, no, I think Elinor Ostrom's work is incredibly valuable, but I don't think what she said was communities can and always will win. But yes, of course, you know, I think there's much we can learn from her work.
And can I just add, you know, people like Helena Norberg-Hodge and the economics of happiness, local futures, the localization movement is very adamant that localization and the responses to how you spend your money, how you give and share and care in the caring economy, all of the local activities we do really do matter. But I guess I would suggest that the structural aspects of bringing all of that together to sort of not just leave it, it's almost a neoliberal idea to leave it to the little communities, they'll work it out. Well, no, there are barriers and institutional structures at the other scales, whether that's state or local or federal, that we also need to pick apart. And Richard's already touched on some of that. So Michelle's asked, Richard, do you think we should use taxes instead of interest rates to combat inflation?
Yes, not just taxes, but regulation as well. So yeah, we've created this false binary in Australia that, you know, interest rates are how you control inflation, and fiscal policy, not even sure what you should do with it. That's just convention. That's not good economic theory or good economic evidence. And again, to name drop, when Joe Stiglitz was out here recently, Nobel Prize winning economist, he kind of couldn't believe that Australia wasn't using, for example, the opportunity. Here's a simple solution. What if we collected billions of dollars from the oil and gas and coal industry and spent it making childcare free? What would that do to inflation? Well, by definition, it would lower it, because the cost of inflation is included in the consumer price index. Would free childcare be good for inflation? Yes. Would it help increase women's participation in the labour market if they felt like participating? Yes. Would it grow the economy? Yes. Would it help to lower the gap between men and women? Yes. Sounds horrible, doesn't it? All right. But here we are in Australia going, oh, inflation must increase interest rates. No, that's not economics, that's politics.
Exactly. Thanks, Richard. Sian's popped in another question. Richard, can you identify any university in the world who provides education about how citizens can achieve self-governance from the bottom up to enrich democracy? And he's compared it to the sustainable communities of Indigenous societies for millennia.
No, but I confess I haven't looked either. So maybe one is trying to teach people, but I doubt it. Look, you know, I think universities are good, but not perfect. Their business model and or their educational model is usually the replication of some existing kind of knowledge, not cultural transformation. It's not obvious to me that unis are the right place to drive cultural transformation, but at the same time, I'm glad I went to uni, and I think if people can and want to, it's a good thing. But ultimately, even though there might be a lot of progressives at unis, they're often quite conservative institutions.
Thanks, Richard. JP has asked, there appear to be two economic systems operating today: the real economy, the necessities, the goods and services, and the casino economy, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex. What happens between the two and how they affect society and Earth? Could they ever be, could they be separated? Perhaps just the broader question is, do you think there are these two economies, the so-called real economy where people go about their daily business, and then the stock market, the military-industrial complex, etc.?
Oh, it's never been thus. I mean, you know, you go back to the Dutch experiment with tulip bulbs. People have been speculating on all sorts of crazy, and gambling, kind of the same thing, on all sorts of things for thousands of years, really, but we've documented it clearly for hundreds. Look, again, this is the thing. We have to have a very strong sense amongst ourselves, individually and in our group, like, what is the economy? And, you know, frankly, if you want to go waste your money on Bitcoin, I don't care. Like, whatever. Like, I'm a libertarian. You want to do that? Fine. But actually, we still as a society need to answer questions like, are we going to let that coal mine get built up the road, or are we going to do something to increase minimum wages? So I don't care if people who are rich enough, and let's face it, you need to be rich to play these games. I don't care if people who are rich enough to be able to spend most of their time and a lot of their money speculating on stuff. Whatever, I don't care. It's just an argument for why we should tax people more. Because clearly when you get that rich, you can afford to do stuff like that. But yeah, I think we should never really take our eye off what I think you mean by the real economy. I wouldn't get too worried about what happened in the other bit, for good or ill, but don't let anything happening there affect the decisions we're making that we care about.
Okay, thanks, Richard. There's a question from Sarah, which Richard, you and I might both want to talk about, which is, can you discuss the similarities and differences between well-being economics, earth-centered economics, feminist economics, and perhaps I could add steady state economics, diverse economies, community economies, environmental economics, ecological economics. I'll start, but then I'll let Richard answer, because this is something we grapple with all the time. When we deliberately framed NENA as the New Economy Network Australia, it was in recognition that the old economy, very terrible simplistic name, a fossil fuel, extractivist oriented, hierarchical, nasty capitalist system, if we must call it that. The old economy has helped trash the planet because it's built on the European notions of expansion and extractivism. We were exploring, how do we build a different economic system based on what people want? And the reality of working in Australia was that there were already people subscribing to steady state economics, ecological economics, solidarity, feminism. We've decided to use the framing new to bring as many people together as possible to explore all of the different ideas around economics. NENA was born before well-being economics started to become an international and national interest in terms of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance internationally, the New Zealand budget. So now we host the Wellbeing, or We All Australia Hub, which is connected to the international wellbeing movement. And I'm hoping that Richard might talk, we might actually talk a bit about the federal government's interest, allegedly, in building a wellbeing budget. But from a non-economist point of view, these are all different ways of looking at current economic systems and either critiquing them or trying to change them. Inside NENA, what we're particularly interested in is any system that helps us connect with the living earth and the health and interest of humans, and then work our way back out at a local or bioregional way to connect up at different scales. What does it look like to be healthy here in Alice Springs or here in the rainforest? How do we get inspired by, learn from Indigenous people who literally had the equivalent of bioregional laws and economic systems that suited their place? We're interested in that. We're not sure we believe in isms or the new best theory. There's lots of different theories. But Richard, I'd love to know what you think.
Look, well, I pretty much agree with what you've just said, Michelle. I mean, I don't know if I think too small or too big, but I'm just not giving up on just the word economics. Like, you can stick any adjective you want in front of it. I'm telling you, there's nothing in an economics textbook that says we have to maximize GDP, be nasty to women, and trash the environment. There's nothing in there that says we should do that. A lot of, just like people find in the Bible an excuse to be a bigot, right? Just like because people find in the Quran the excuse to, do whatever they feel like doing, people could find whatever they want in an economics textbook. Now, I'm not going to die in a ditch and say, oh, economics is the one true science and you must all bow before it. Anyone that knows me knows I don't think that. But I'm adamant there's nothing in economics that says we have to create waste to create wealth, that inequality is no problem. Who cares about pollution? We just have to suck things dry, make some profit now. That's not economics. So I find it very easy to talk to anyone who wants to talk about well-being economics or donut economics or feminist economics or any of these kind of, don't get me wrong, coherent groups with a particular sort of bugbear. Fine, that's legitimate, but I don't think it needs to be set up in opposition to something called bad economics. because economics is just a whole bunch of ideas about a whole bunch of how things may or may not kind of work. The value judgments that people ascribe to that aren't there, even though, as I said, just like with religion, you might find some high priests determined to say that something's a sin, but if you go read the original text, you'll find it's not really there. So I get a bit careful with there. And also, look, I know you've got degrowth tomorrow, and I know people get excited about steady states. I'm probably thinking too big or too small again. Don't know. I don't care. I don't want to degrow. I don't want to grow. I don't want a steady state. I want us to do more of the things we want to do more of and less of the things we want to do less of. And having a number, GDP or otherwise, tell me that, we can't, think what a steady state economy is. It says that we should stay the size we are now. Why? How random. No, I mean this. Like, does that mean if we had have accepted the premise 10 years ago, we'd have been happy with a much smaller steady state? Or if we wait 5 years, we'll have a much bigger steady state? Or degrowth? I don't want to degrow GDP. I want to degrow the coal industry, and I want to grow the care economy. And I don't want to stop growing the care economy at some point because someone says that might trigger GDP growth. I mean, let's be clear, if we spend a fortune investing in health and education and public transport and renewable energy, and we set ourselves full tilt to solve a whole bunch of the problems we've ignored for decades, GDP would rise. Sign me up. Because if we grow things we want more of, that's good.
Yeah, but it really does bring into sort of sharp relief the crisis of exceeding planetary boundaries, the reasons that people are concerned about ecological limits. Would you say that you're interested in the growth of things that don't grow material consumption, or yes, do you not care?
But no, I do care. I've just spent a whole time saying, please don't go build another pile of waste.
Yes.
But just be crystal clear, GDP, gross domestic product, goes up just as much if you buy a massage or buy a lounge, right? It's not GDP that's telling you whether something's good or bad. It's you. So this is my point. I don't care about GDP. I don't care if it's going up. I don't care if it's going down. I don't care if it's staying the same. Because why would I let someone else's accounting framework built in the 1940s dominate my thinking? So anyway, I get the vibe. Yep. I get the sense of it. I don't think people are stupid who are talking about degrowth. But, for me, why are you letting some old accounting framework tell you whether we want more money spent on aged care or not?
And just quickly, so for folks commenting on GDP was an old accounting framework that got adopted by the United Nations after folks like the winners of the Second World War promoted it as a way of measuring really purchase power, buying and selling products and services. That's it. That's what GDP is about. So when Richard said he doesn't care if it grows or not, you can, and that's the problem with GDP. A war is good for GDP. A crisis, these are the comments people are making, a crisis, flooding, a response. Technically, climate change is good for GDP because it keeps disrupting everything and making everyone hustle and spend more and respond. So, Richard, what do you think about the arguments? And this links back to the initial question about well-being economics and others. There's some really excellent ideas out there about well-being economy indicators, which are trying to say, and I'm interested in what you say about this. If you say that it doesn't matter with GDP, why are other people saying we've got to get rid of GDP and have other ways of measuring success or happiness in a community?
I don't know, you have to ask them. But look, 20 years ago, I wrote a paper on the genuine progress indicator for Australia. It's GDP adjusted for a whole bunch of things. As thought experiments go, as ways to confront individuals and policymakers with the limitations of GDP, coming up with other indicators is a good idea. I'm not opposed to that. Mm-hmm. But let's be clear, no one thinks that in their family, whatever that means for you, imagine you had to come up with a number that told you if your family was on track. right? A number, one number. You can have as many as many indicators that feed into it, but we will have the genuine family indicator for you. Or maybe you work at a university or an aged care centre or somewhere else. Do you think there's a number, one number, based on a survey of consumer satisfaction and staff satisfaction and whether the kids have all got runny noses, whatever? Do you think you could capture all of the complexity of your workplace into one number? Well, there's 25 million Australians doing some pretty funky stuff. Do you really think that anyone is going to come up with a number that simultaneously captures the benefits we get from creating a voice to Parliament, the harm we get from losing a species, the joy we get from having more leisure time, the psychological pain associated with watching other people's suffering and misery? Do anyone on this call think that anyone in any discipline is going, I've got it, I've got the one true number, let me just put that together for you and I'll get back to you? Like, the arrogance of thinking you can actually solve it is extreme. But that doesn't mean that the process of having a conversation saying, well, if we did want to measure well-being, what would the multiple dimensions of that be? If we did want to grapple with the fact that reducing Indigenous disadvantage is important, and the reducing gender pay gaps is important, and reducing species loss is important, how will we weight those three things? Are they all even? Which one's more important, right? Anyone that thinks they can answer the question of which of those three indicators is more important, I think needs to have a good hard look at themselves. But to be clear, collecting the information, having the conversation, presenting the data, thinking about it, I've been doing it my whole adult life. But I don't believe for a minute that anyone out there is going to come up with the number that if only we adopted their number, we wouldn't make decisions as dumb as the ones we get when we follow GDP.
Thanks, Richard.
Sorry if that was a tad strident.
No, we want strident. We want gnarly, interesting questions. We really do. For a completely different tone, there's a really nice, straightforward question. I'd be interested to hear about Richard's views on carbon credits and whether he thinks they will be successful in driving change and reducing pollution.
No, they won't. Their primary function, at best, at absolute best, all carbon offsets do is maintain our emissions at a level that are too high. Right? We've now created an environment where if Michelle does something good, Richard can do something bad, so we're net no change. Right? We've got science saying we need to rapidly reduce emissions. That means do less bad things and more good things. But we're like, oh, hang on, what if every time someone did something good, someone could do something bad? So carbon offsets are an excuse for inaction. And that leaves aside the fact that there's a lot of compelling evidence that most of the so-called carbon offsets are dodgy as all get out. And that doesn't mean that they all are, but because you and I can't tell the difference between the good ones and the crap ones, if I'm allowed to do something bad because you pretended to do something good, then the world just got worse, not better. So, I mean, there's a hilarious story out today where the landfill gas sector, the people that suck methane out of the waste dumps we build, have basically come out and said, look, we get paid way too much money. We've been generating far more carbon credits than we actually should have been getting paid for. We think the rules are broken. We think we should change the rules.
My goodness.
You've got the government regulator going, no, it's fine.
Oh my God, they want certainty. Oh my God.
Yeah. So
that's out today, is it, Richard? I haven't seen
today.
That.
Absolutely. Wow. Check out the ABC today. But the regulator, even when the people profiting from it say, you know, this system has no integrity, the regulator says, yes, it does. So no, here's the thing, if we wanted to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and I see no evidence that as a society we do, what would we do? We would stop building new coal mines. We would stop building new gas wells. We would rapidly close our coal-fired power stations. We would stop spending $10 billion a year to subsidise the use of fossil fuels. None of this is complicated.
Yep.
But to be clear, in Australia today, post-election, we're still building new coal mines, we're still opening new gas wells, and we're still spending $10 billion a year to subsidise fossil fuel use. Things like offsets, and I hate to say it, don't get me wrong, we should build lots of renewables, but if we're building lots of renewables and we're still opening new coal and gas, we're not getting better. So there's a lot of bullshit going on here.
There is, and I'm really pleased to hear you explain all of that, Richard, because whenever I watch the offset debate, and particularly as it moved, it started as a market mechanism, and now it's moved into biodiversity offsets. Some of the most unique examples of ecosystems, and people are saying, you can take that out so long as you plant some trees over there. Yeah. This is it's immoral to say that an old growth or an existing ecosystem can be replaced by a few trees that perhaps no one will even check and see if they're alive, and where do the animals live, and so on and so forth. So offsets, I very rarely do I ever see anything that comes out of them that's good. It's just weasel words. It's just people trying to game the system so they don't have to give anything up.
Yeah, and also I agree with everything you said, and it's economic nonsense, and it's...
Is it? Okay. I thought somewhere in there the economists had worked out that there were ways you could do it in certain areas or markets, but not in the living world, not in the real economy, not in the real world.
Yeah, well, but climate change happens in the real world.
Yes.
And no, it's absolutely nonsensical.
It's actually like back in 1995 when I worked for the Sustainable Energy Development Authority, Australia's first agency created to address climate change and CO2 emissions and such. It was the rumor was that folks from the stock market had broken into the electricity sector and forced its breakup and turned it into a market, whereas before it was a government provided service. And think about it this way, the government used to control the kind of the provision of electricity. Energy efficiency in the 70s and early 80s was a thing, but suddenly if it's a market and people are trying to sell their electricity on a market, why would they ever try to decrease the amount of electricity you use?
Yeah,
the whole thing was ridiculous.
Absolutely.
And then they created a system that no one actually understood. And one of my economist friends said, if you can't understand it without, a 22-day course trying to get your head around the complexity, he said it's probably not working and it's not even real. So
yeah, all of that.
All right, all of that. Okay, a couple more questions, Richard. You're doing very well. We'll release you back into the wild in about 10, 15 minutes. So we're doing well. There's actually a quick question here. Shanti's asked, why are referendums a dirty word? That's actually a question for me. The only reason I referred to that, Shanti, is in our form of democracy. So just remember, democracy is not one thing. It's lots of different things. And somebody else asked a question, well, where else could it be working better? If you have a system that says your input to democracy is every 3 years, you will vote for someone to go off and represent you, and that's it. It's a very limited form of democracy. If you have representatives, sure, but you might then have other ways for ordinary people to provide input, to make a choice about a certain idea, to share their views about certain ideas. So if those political folk are active and they go out into the community and they're talking and sharing and feeding ideas, great, but they don't have to. All they have to do is get re-elected. So in other countries, there's things like liquid democracy, and there's almost weekly surveys and mini referenda where people can vote. Some of we always herald the Scandinavian countries as sort of socialist dreams, but they do have, some of these countries have a stronger form of interaction between the political process and its citizenry. The reason I made a sort of a derogatory comment about Australia's referendums is that they're incredibly complex, and Australians, whether they're conservative or the questions being put to them are dodgy. The basic numbers are, since Federation, we've had about 45 national referendums, and only 8 of them have been successful. So that means it's a difficult way to make change. It's not a regular way. We could have a system that reaches out to the Australian public every month. Where are your priorities for the next federal budget? What do you think? The government's not asking questions that way. They just assume that how we vote people in is enough. And I've heard senior bureaucrats say that community engagement begins and ends at the ballot box. The rest of it's up to us. We're the bureaucrats executing the will of the government. I find those comments quite terrifying in terms of the rest of us trying to make a better society. So that leaves us with a whole bunch of other amazing, important ways to work, but we have a limited form of really directly influencing those kinds of things. So, all right, that's my little rant about democracy and such. There's a couple of just sort of comments about our failed democracy. I may not have time to go into them, but I probably agree with many of them. Is the decision to waste money on nuclear submarines a product of our international politics? Doesn't seem to be in any way a local decision.
Look, where to start? There's bipartisan consensus. An overwhelming majority of the people that Australians elected think this is a good idea. I don't know what forum that conversation was held in before they concluded that. I don't know how that came to be. But I do know that 5 years ago, we couldn't afford to tackle climate change. And now we can afford to drop $250 billion on subs that we didn't even know we needed. So is foreign policy part of that? Yeah, of course it is. But, you know, I just think it sounds ridiculous, but I do mean this literally. We've got to look for the good news in this. This is how rich we are. Okay, there aren't a lot of countries in the world that can drop a lazy $250 billion onto some stuff that we probably don't need. Okay, now this is like, and once you change your mindset and realize, wow, I live in a country that rich, how can a politician ever look me in the eye and say, we can't afford to spend more on community housing. We can't afford to spend more on biodiversity. We can't afford to spend more on domestic violence shelters to help women fleeing violence. Like once you own the power of knowing, my God, we've got a lot of money and my God, they're happy to hose it when they feel like hosing it. If we could all collectively own that, like we don't actually have to know why they decided to do it. You know, appease Americans, make the English happy, piss off the French. Or wedge Labor in the lead up to election because Morrison hoped Labor would oppose it. Like that's part of this. Like why did they do it? I don't know. But that they did it should be incredibly empowering for us. I mean, the stage 3 tax cuts are going to cost $200 billion and flow overwhelmingly to high-income blokes like me. So on behalf of you all, thank you. Very kind of you. Like, you want to stuff money in my pocket? Okay. I'm trying my best to not get it, but if you really want to give it to me, okay. But again, that's how rich we are. So you want to know how we can have an Earth-centric planet? By being as pushy as the people that figured out how to get subs, by being as pushy as the people who figured out how to get me a big tax cut, you know. But the opposite of all that is, you know, we need to come together as communities, as individuals, as families, whatever unit you care about, and we've actually got to build these conversations up. We can't just hope that mum or dad is going to come and fix it for us. That's the brutal truth of democracy. It's if we can't figure out a way to cooperate, we're not going to win anything. But again, look at what happened at the last election. A whole bunch of people came together and cooperated in ways that people didn't expect and radically changed the political debate in Australia.
That's wonderful. People are saying, very inspiring. Someone even said, I didn't think I could like an economist until today. Thank you, Richard. No, but it's great. And this is why we value you, Richard. There's an honesty about what the economy really is and what it isn't and the things that we should be trying to do. And I can't plug any more than I always do, but for people who want to be part of these conversations and just come and join Nina, join other groups that are working towards the transitions or advocating for political change. You know, we can't, none of us can do this on our own. Join other groups, create other groups, bring people with you. If you're interested, there's a lot of work to be done. There's just one or two more quick questions, and then I really will let you go, Richard. There's a really good question here from Helen, which I think is a nice way to talk about the power, almost the hypnosis of the market. So when you were talking about how different industries have changed over time, she's put, well, we didn't stop going to get our photos developed until something better came along. We're at a point where it's not something better that we need, it's something less. And that's not how a market economy works. Now, it's a statement, but I'd like to know your thoughts, Richard, on this big, important question that I ask all the time. I actually did my PhD on it. How do we help industrialized societies want more? Want less? Sorry, God, what a terrible Freudian slip. Want less, make less. I know this is about do the good things and do the bad thing, but how do we get them to change the culture of expecting too much from the world, or reducing demand?
Okay, so I'm going to just reject the premise of the question. When we stop spending money on something, the people who sell it go broke.
Yep.
Full stop. Lock it in. What you go and spend your money on next is irrelevant to the person who just went broke. Okay? So when you stop buying photo development lab services, they go broke. They could have gone broke because we stopped taking photos because we just didn't care. Or they could have gone broke because someone invented digital cameras. Or they could have gone broke because everyone went blind and didn't need photography. It doesn't matter what the why behind it is. If you don't spend money on something, less of it will get made. If lots of people stop spending money on something, it'll go broke and stop. Okay, we do have that power. What we then go and do with our spare money, well, that determines what new things will get created. Now, if I decided to stop buying Uber Eats and stop going to IKEA on the weekend and stop getting my hair cut so often and work 4 days a week, then guess what? There'd be less demand for Uber Eats, less demand for IKEA, less demand for hairdressers, and no new demand for anything else because I just bought some leisure instead of some stuff. So we all have that power, keeping in mind, as I said, the structural problems like how will I afford housing? So it's not some big coordinated system. When you, me, and everyone stop buying so much of a particular product, then they will lay workers off. They will potentially go broke. That's capitalism. That's okay. People go broke all the time. Doesn't make them evil or stupid. I mean, look at the incredible booming demand in Australia today for dog grooming. I mean, who knew? No, I mean it.
I know. Yes.
But if I said to you 15 years ago, don't worry about where the jobs will come from, dog grooming will cover a large part of it, you'd think I'm ridiculous. Right, but that's me putting my economist hat on and say that's what capitalism does. And by the way, that's how rich we are. Okay, so these are good problems to have.
But how do we tackle then? I agree with you on many fronts, but when it comes to energy, your average human who needs to get from A to B and the public transport mightn't be good. How do we use our individual purchasing choices? I think that's when it opens up to the collective. That's when the market can't help. That's when that higher level has to say, collectively, stop.
Absolutely. So when we've created structures that separate the individual consumer from the producer, like, as we have with electricity or as we have with public transport, then obviously what I've said doesn't apply. That's why you need to take a different size lens to different size problems. And that's why I think whether you want to live in your backyard thinking about your own permaculture or not, you got to spend some time thinking about those bigger structural issues.
Which comes back to one of your initial comments about it's a collective response. And it comes back to politics. It comes back to the collective use of our resources, the collective use of our decision-making. And it brings us full circle back to how do we engage in politics, decision-making, structural reform. So absolutely. And that's what Sarah, that's what we've just said. She said, yes, responsibility can't always just be for the individual. No, it's not. But it is individuals who make up society. So we each have power to influence others, to talk to others, to be part of those various systems, to join other groups. But we also have to push in a similar direction. And we're seeing the last 15 years, the shifting in divestment strategies, the closing down of some fossil fuel interests in Newcastle and other places, but we need to do a lot more of it.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think, well, A, we need to do both, and B, there are things that connect those two things. So the whole point of a carbon price, for example, was to make electricity that came from fossil fuels relatively more expensive than electricity that came from renewables. That was designed to give individuals more incentive to change their individual decision-making. But an individual can't get a carbon tax created. So again, and this, I'll plug some books, but the whole point of curing affluenza was to say it's a trap to think that we either solve problems at the individual level or at the collective level. And the opportunity is to find fun, engaging, useful ways to solve problems at a local level that scale up and build the kind of awareness and political support to do something bigger. And it's arrogant to think, I know the silver bullet, here's the theory of change. If you're not on my path, you're an idiot. The whole point of that book was to say, look, we know how to do this stuff. It's not terribly complicated. The world will always change. We're just haggling about in what direction. There's plenty of lessons from the past on how other people have done it. We can learn from them if we want. But yeah, there is no thing we can do. And I'm not suggesting you're arguing this, but we have to be really careful to think the solution is to have community representation or something or other.
Yeah.
The solution is to become a minimalist, or the solution. No, I would say there's multifaceted problems. We need to push on multiple levels. Each of us might put more or less effort into different levels, but we've got to cooperate and we've got to pay attention to making sure we're actually pushing on all the levels, not just my favorite one.
Yes, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a perfect way to wrap up, because the world has not gotten to this point from one big decision. It's been a multiplicity of fragmented, complex, weird pieces of luck, pieces of unluck. And so our job, I think, as caring citizens is to keep doing what we're doing, keep hammering on as best we can as individuals and groups and societies. My only advice to everyone is find some of the stuff you either enjoy doing or love doing, whether that's annoying people and being obnoxious or joining folks or anything, planting anything, and just get on and do it. And before I thank Richard and you all run away, I really want to plug, obviously, try to connect with Nina. We are not perfect. We are not funded. We are run by volunteers who care about building a different way of thinking about the economy and building a different system. So I've just put in there our website, neweconomy.org.au, join the mailing list, become a member if you can, share your ideas. We're going to be starting a really cool process called the People's Federal Budget, which I am going to harass you about, Richard. I'd love to get some wonderful experts to come teach us how to think about the budget and pull the bugger apart, and then how we can get thousands of people to share their views about how money should be spent in this country. A small, humble way of offering an alternative way of suggesting a different future. Yes, the recording will be available. Everyone who's registered for today's webinar will receive a link in the next few days, and it will be public at the end of Earth Laws Month. So connect with Nina and look up the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, which is the mothership for many, many good things, which is delving deeply into the complex problems we're facing and some of the relatively simple solutions we have, like love Mother Nature more than you love IKEA, and we might make a few steps forward. But enough of me. Richard, we always love having you. This has been a fantastic session. Lots of great feedback there. I hope you can see some of the chats. Thank you to everybody in our audience for asking excellent questions and gnarly questions. And yeah, can we please show Richard our thanks in some daggy Zoom-related way? Air clapping, pressing that emotion button, any reactions you have.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle, for hosting this, and thanks for the thumbs up so I can see there. No, thank you for hosting this. Thanks everyone for listening to me rant. It's always a bit weird in a room alone yelling. You're
not alone, Richard.
It is one way to connect with people. And look, please do take Michelle's advice and follow the work of Nina. And likewise, if you're interested in what I've said today, follow myself or the Australia Institute on Twitter. We have a big email list. We keep people up to date with our events. But that said, love to do events with other groups. Similarly, feel free to invite me or my staff to come to some of your events. We're a philanthropically funded think tank, and we're only here to help inform conversations like this. So, so don't be shy. Reach out, follow us, follow Michelle. Again, everyone's assuming you won't. Like, that's how you maintain the status quo. I mean this. Like, if everyone feels like we can't do something, we can't come together, we can't make new friends, we can't find new allies, if we believe that until Rupert dies or blah, 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 we can't do anything, no, that's how they win. So, do the opposite of what they think. join groups, participate, talk to people, and change the world.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. It's been wonderful. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon. And please do join us for the rest of the week. Economics for the Earth, degrowth, wellbeing economics, and Indigenous perspectives on how we can have medium expectations. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you, Richard.